Okay, so thank you very much for your patience there. And Hannah, what have we got from you?
Hello. Um, yeah, I'm Hannah calling from Santa Cruz, California today, and I am in the grief niche, and I'm working to get clarification on how to articulate it, and if yeah, feedback if it sounds good. I'm wanting to focus on helping women entrepreneurs who have had some kind of tragedy or loss interrupt their business, and that they need support to get complete with their grief, or actually, grief doesn't necessarily get complete, but just have some tools to be able to get through the grief enough to have their business turn back into profitable and focused, or pulling in resources and support they might need. So I'm just looking for some reflection on if this sounds like a good marketable niche. And
Sure.
yeah.
First thing, the volume on is a little loud. I don't know if if it's just me or you're speaking
Oh,
very
is it
close to the
loud?
mic, but it was just a little loud.
Okay, thanks for telling me. Is that better?
Yeah. Let's see. Um, we're in
Better?
I think that's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so grief for entrepreneurs. Now, you've seen a real need for this amongst entrepreneurs?
Well, I've been doing grief work in general, for just like community grief work, and I was interested in working with entrepreneurs. And actually, what I really want to do is I want to help. I want to work with women entrepreneurs and leadership, develop leadership skills. But one of the things I see blocking them is having unprocessed grief. And so I was seeing grief as an entry point to be able to then access ongoing programs for leadership development.
Okay. It's still a little bit loud.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so grief, what you really want to be doing with them is leadership work?
Yes, leadership development.
Okay. And leadership development in what way?
Um, well, after tragedy or loss, it's like um, new identity, new business, and new skills to kind of like after like in the hero's journey, it's that time of the return to the world with a gift. So so it's the what it takes to launch a new business, and the inner game of that.
Okay, so it's the kind of inner work stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Um, the so you want to do kind of this inner work, helping them be more effective, powerful in their businesses. And grief seems like a way that you could get in there. That seems like an entry point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So it's
Now,
grief.
Hannah,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
is it? And it's still so loud. Do you have a
Okay,
microphone? Are you?
I do. Let me turn off my mic. Yeah.
Okay, is this better?
Um, keep going.
Can you hear me now? It's better?
It's still, wow, it's still so loud. I don't know if it's just me. I'm just thinking about
Wow.
the record. Usually, if you just back off the mic, just
Okay,
don't speak quite so close. It'll probably help.
okay. Is this better now?
A little bit better, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So it's just the thing that's tripping me up. You can see I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Is the thing that trips me up a bit is that, oh, it's a lot of shuffling noise in the background there now.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. What's tripping me up there is that it's in some ways it feels like an odd pairing, the grief and the entrepreneurship. Like I don't see them naturally going together. There's a bit of a shoehorning one into the other. It sort of initially off the top seems to me. So there's three criteria that I like to use whenever I am looking at a target market. The first one is it clear? Do I understand immediately if I'm in this group or not in this group? The second is, are there enough of them who can afford to pay me full price? The third one is, can I find them? And so this one trips up a little bit. Do I know if I'm in this group? I suppose I would. If I, okay, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in grief. And then if you can really draw that connection, here's how the grief is stopping you or hurting your business or getting in the way, unduly. I could see there being a thing. Then in terms of, are there enough who can afford, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of them must have grief. Maybe partly I'm not totally clear which types of entrepreneurs we're talking about, though, but given that you're in Santa Cruz, I have some sense of what that might be. But I just wonder, okay, yeah, are there enough of them? But the big one is, can you find them? Are there hubs? Are there places where you can find them? And that's sort of the big question. Although I suppose if you were just to focus on, you could just be speaking to, if you figure which types of entrepreneurs you want to work with, you could just be speaking on stages to those people and say, I just want to talk about grief, because there's a good chance that a heavy chunk of that audience is going through some kind of grief. And I think the wondering of, like, what is the relationship between grief and entrepreneurship? What is the relationship between grief and having a business? What is the proper relationship between having something that is genuinely filled with grief and needing to keep going in the world? That's a very tough situation that a lot of people find themselves in.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because I'm getting the clarity from hearing you speak is that, because grief is universal, and I've been offering grief rituals for the community, and they're filling up, and there's people that are then coming to me asking me, I want to be able to do this work. I want to be able to offer, I want to train in this. And so maybe it's looking at training other grief workers,
Sure.
is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, and that's immediately much clearer. That's immediately much easier for me to see. And when you say grief is universal, how do you mean?
What I mean is to be, most people have love. We're human beings and we love, and at some point we're going to lose what we love, whether that's people or things or pets or a way of life or aging, all the different kinds of grief.
Yeah. The only caveat, the proviso I'd put here, influenced a bit by my time with Stephen Jenkinson, and also in marketing. My thoughts about this is, it's not inevitable actually that grief is so universal, in that it's possible for people to be in the middle of a situation that calls for grief and for no grief to appear. That's really a possible thing. And the danger that can happen, and I'm not saying this is necessarily true for you, but it's a good wider point here, because people will say, oh, but everybody goes through stress. You see, everybody goes through grief, and therefore I can reach all these people. It's universal in this way, and what a broad appeal it has. But it's sort of shallow and wide relevance versus narrow and deep. Grief versus my dog of 20 years just died. That one is very specific and narrow and deep. Or you're going through the grief of your parents dying. That's different than your children dying. That's different than your lover or partner dying. These are all different things. So it's good to be specific, about what kind of, or it can be anyways. That's one. And we can just assume, oh, everybody goes through this, but it's not true that everybody goes through it or has the same experiences. Some people go through their whole life and they never really touch the grief. It's just grievance their whole life. It's shut down. And so I would agree that, grief is a universal, that's how the universe is, limits and endings everywhere. But it's good for everyone to remember that even this diagnosis you have, this thing that we think is so common, it isn't necessarily. And if we keep speaking at the diagnostic level of the thing that we see that's there, the dynamic, the element that's at play, they may not be aware of it. And so we need to speak to the symptoms. We need to speak to what is it that's in their lived experience in their life. But yes, but Hannah, the idea of doing more trainings on that's just instantly very clear in a way that the entrepreneurship and grief, I'm not saying it couldn't, the entrepreneurship and grief, it couldn't get clear, or it was just tripped me up a bit, but there could be an amazing niche there, I don't know, but there could be.
Okay. So the symptoms then, or this would be like if they're feeling unproductive at work, or they're
Yeah.
feeling tired. So then I would speak more to that. They might not know it's coming from their unprocessed grief of their father died 15 years ago. They might not make that connection, but
I hear you. Yeah, there's a few ways you could go with that. I mean, you could just say, not even mention grief, and just pick a symptom that is usually the result of unprocessed grief, and then help them see that that's the case. You could do that. But I mean, you can also talk about grief, but then it's, grief is a situation. Grief isn't a problem.
right.
Grief is just, well, yeah, great. I have grief, but so what? Again, is the question.
Mhm.
And they may say, well, I'm raising my kids and trying to run a business, and I can barely get out of bed in the morning. That's the problem. Or the problem is, it's killed my enjoyment of life, or it's, I'm just sad. I weep at the drop of a hat, and it's affecting my career. It's all the ways that grief that hasn't been processed properly, grief that hasn't been gone through. Like, what are again, for everybody, whenever you have something that's like, okay, this is the diagnosis, is this thing is missing, or this thing is present that shouldn't be. A good question to ask yourself is, where does this go? What are the consequences of this? Yeah, and then you keep tracing it back to the symptoms that somebody might live out. Because then if you say, and there's the question of how aware are they of the symptoms coming from grief. In this case, I think you could probably just say it. That these things are coming from grief, but you don't know what to do about it. I mean, I remember just on the personal level, going through some heartbreak. I just fell in love with a woman. I mean, this was years and years ago, and when I was much younger, and it ended, and I was a mess for 5 years. And I knew what it was. Like, there was no mystery to me that I was grieving. But for 5 years, I was just a wreck. And I did I wrote the sad poems. I did the little rituals. I wrote a song about it. I did everything you could think to do, and it just wasn't moving it. And so I was aware this is rough to not have this, but I didn't know what to do. So if you'd ask me, well, oh yeah, you're heartbroken about this woman. Well, so what? Who gives a shit? I do. Well, why? Because, and I could have told you what was happening. And those are the things then we speak to on a homepage or in a sales letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. It feels like it organizes around purpose and identity. And yeah, so I have some deeper work to do around getting.
Okay. Well, one of the things I'd recommend doing is a little Venn diagram where you might have like grief, purpose, identity as circles. And maybe there's some other circles to add in there, and just doodle and see how they relate to each other. Like, okay, what happens if we take that purpose or identity, or how visually do these things relate? Is it more of a pyramid? Is it a Venn diagram? But I would just try doodling, and maybe other elements will add themselves to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. A Venn diagram is killer, everybody. A good Venn diagram in a presentation, or some image that you can use. This is heavy in the point of view work. We just did our 30-day point of view program last month, and that was a lot of it. Can you come up with some imagery that captures your work and your point of view? Very helpful in terms of building the clarity and the credibility. Okay, well, thank you so much, Hannah.